In this video, we're going to be looking at the octopus. These creatures have inspired myth, legend, and curiosity since they were discovered. It's tough to imagine a creature so different to ourselves. Octopus are very strange, alien creatures. They have no bones, they have multiple brains, they can change the colour and texture of their bodies on a whim, they can see and smell through their skin, they can squeeze through any hole larger than their eyes. These species offer a very real and very useful window into understanding how sentient life forms can independently evolve and what intelligent life might look like on another planet. In this video, we're going to go on a journey where we'll learn everything there is to know about these strange, squishy aliens, looking at their evolutionary history, their anatomy, their lifestyles, notable species, as well as one of the most important questions of all. Just how intelligent are they? And how should this change the way that we as humans interact with them? We're starting off by going back to the beginning, seeing how they evolved from primitive worms into the diverse group of animals we see today. But firstly, what is an octopus? Octopus is the name given to a family of species, of which the main defining features are the lack of a hard shell and 8 arms. Octopus belong to the class Cephalopoda, which also includes creatures like cuttlefish and squid. Cephalopods also belong to a greater group of animals known as mollusks, including other creatures like snails. The last common ancestor between us and octopus lived an almost unfathomably long time ago, around 700 to 800 million years ago to be specific. These time frames can be difficult for us to wrap our heads around, but back then, to paint a picture, the world was barren. Trees did not yet exist, and there was no life on land, with the vast majority of organisms being simple and microscopic. Our last common ancestor, between us and octopus, living around this time, was likely a small sea-dwelling worm-like creature, and would have only have had a very basic nervous system of just a few neurons. Fast forward to around 500 million years ago, during what's known as the Late Cambrian era, life began to get much more complex. During this period, the first cephalopods emerged. These early octopus ancestors had developed into small shelled mollusks like the Plectronoceras, an interesting small creature shaped like a gnome's hat, which had a shell that could be filled with gas to make the creature more buoyant. This allowed them to live in shallower waters. However, while these species are quite interesting, these creatures were still incredibly simple. Going forward to around 330 million years ago, we reach what's known as the Carboniferous period. By this point, early cephalopods had continued to develop and adapt, evolving internalized shells, essentially putting the shell underneath their skin. This adaptation was a crucial step in their evolution, and was driven by the increasing need for agility and speed. During the Carboniferous, there was a huge increase in the number of jawed fish species, which had adapted to be able to crush open shells, like the shells of these octopus early ancestors. This meant to adapt, the early cephalopods had to choose mobility and speed over the raw defense of an external shell, allowing them to move much more quickly in the water and better evade predators. An example of this would be the recently discovered species Calypsomopode by Denning, known as the oldest proto-octopus, which had 10 arms, an ink sac, and an internal shell. By the end of the Carboniferous/early Permian, around 300 million years ago, these species began to lose some of their arms, while their internal shells got smaller and smaller, while also beginning to show signs of chromatophores. We'll go into detail on what these are later, but for now, these are essentially what allow octopus to camouflage. But for the most part, the cephalopod species we see around this time start to somewhat resemble, at least in appearance, something closer to a modern octopus. Another 140 to 150 million years into the future, we reach the Jurassic period, and things here start to take much more of a modern look, with these early octopuses possessing many of the hallmarks of the current counterparts, having 8 arms, suckers, camouflage, as well as shell being even smaller than before. Then finally, we reach the Cretaceous period, about 95 million years ago, where we have evidence of the first, or one of the first, true octopus species, known as Paleoctopus, which only had a vestigial, this meaning useless, internal shell, and all the signs of the octopus species we know and see today. Now we're going to explore what makes an octopus tick, from its free heart cardiovascular system, how each of its suckers are capable of lifting more than the octopus's own body weight. Here we can see a very basic anatomy chart of an octopus, showing the main key features shared by most species. An octopus body is almost day and night different to a human. Being invertebrate, octopus have no bones. with the only hard part of their body being their beak. As we can see here, the octopus's 8 arms are connected directly to its head. Each arm is connected to the arm next to it via the webbing, this material connecting the 2 arms. We can also see the octopus's mantle. This is essentially the octopus's head. It contains most of the vital organs. On the side of this, we can see the octopus's cavity and siphon. The cavity is used for things like reproduction and eliminating waste, and the siphon is used for exhaling and jet propulsion. We're going to start off by discovering the complex biology of what is most likely an octopus's most distinctive feature, its arms. And yes, these are actually not tentacles. Tentacles typically only have suckers at the end, whereas octopus have them all along their arms. We'll get back to the suckers later on, but for now, let's look at the arms. The first thing to point out about an octopus's arm, as I've already mentioned, is that they don't have any bones. Without bones, octopus have had to develop a unique form of muscular control, since without bones, their muscles have nothing hard to pull on. To account for this, octopus muscles act on each other in opposition. To make their arms longer, like reaching out to grab a crab for instance, an octopus contracts its transverse muscles. These long muscles run in a helical clockwise motion down the arm. Think of them like the poles you see outside a barber shop, and essentially squeeze the arm like a tube of toothpaste, reducing the thickness of the arm but making it extend outwards. To shorten its arm, the octopus contracts another set of muscles, the longitudinal muscles, which have the opposite effect to the transverse, essentially pulling the arm inwards, making it shorter and thicker. Shortening and extending the arm is fairly easy. However, octopus have to make complex movements involving multiple processes at the same time, like bending and twisting the arms. Bending involves the simultaneous contraction of the longitudinal muscles. Remember, these are the ones that pull the arm inwards to make it shorter. However, this time, these muscles only activate on one side of the arm, allowing the arm to bend. For twisting, the octopus must contract yet another set of muscles, called the obliques. These muscles, as you can see here, are spiral-shaped and go down the length of the arm. Each arm actually has 2 sets of obliques, one that goes clockwise and one that goes anti-clockwise, and these basically just contract to twist the arm. The next interesting feature of the octopus is the webbing in between its arms. While this might not look super useful, it has a few key uses. Firstly, as we'll see later, octopus are masters of camouflage, and this webbing simply provides more surface area for disguise, helping it to take on different shapes and colours. The webbing is also used to aid the octopus in propulsion, acting like a fin, allowing the octopus to make a quick getaway. Lastly, the webbing is also useful for hunting. As we'll see later, once an octopus gets hold of its prey, it can extend its webbing out and use it to envelop the prey, preventing it from escaping. Okay, so now we've learnt about octopus arms, how they function. We're now going to learn about what's on the arms, the octopus's suckers. Octopus suckers are an ingenious piece of biological engineering. They're relatively simple in design, yet they are incredibly strong, being able to hold on to more than their own body weight. Suckers usually run in 2 parallel rows, side by side, along the underside of the arms. Thanks to the octopus's complex nervous system, each sucker can be controlled individually, allowing for very precise manipulation of objects. In terms of structure, as you can see here, each sucker has a bell-shaped space, similar to a suction cup. This has a fancy name and is called the infundibulum cavity. This is essentially the part that grips onto surfaces. Above this cavity, there's another area with another similarly complex sounding name, called the acetabulum chamber. Muscles surrounding this chamber contract to expand the size of the chamber, creating a vacuum seal onto whatever the sucker is connected to. And like I said before, these things are incredibly strong, with each sucker alone being able to hold on to more than the octopus's own body weight, allowing the octopus to hunt and carry heavy objects. Additionally, octopus suckers are also loaded with what are known as chemotactile sensors, which is a fancy way of saying they can taste and smell using their suckers, allowing them to better understand their surroundings and find prey. Each sucker actually has more receptors, in fact, than a human tongue, just showing how sensitive these things are. So, in addition to being able to grab onto things, octopus arms can also specialize. In a male octopus, one of the arms will specialize into what is called a hectocotylus, or as it's more informally known, a sex arm. This arm is usually an octopus's third arm to the right and develops once the male reaches maturity. As you can see in this image, this arm has been repurposed. If we compare a sex arm to a typical octopus arm, we can see that on the sex arm, there are no suckers at the end. These suckers have been replaced with what you can see here on the end. Firstly, here we can see the spermatophore groove. Spermatophores, basically packets of sperm, move along this groove to the structure we find here, called the ligula. These packets are then stored in a little flap called the calamus. During mating, the spermatophores will travel to the end of the arm and be inserted into the female's mantle. Surprisingly, thanks to a process called convergent evolution, where similar features evolve independently in different species, octopus eyes have developed in a similar way to ours. This is quite significant because we just saw how our last common ancestor lived hundreds of millions of years ago. So, to start off, let's take a look at the basic eye anatomy of octopuses and how it differs to ours. Octopus eyes have the same basic features as our own, having a retina, cornea, pupil, and lens. However, while they have the same basic camera design, there are some big differences. Firstly, the lens in an octopus is much more spherical and rigid. In our eyes, small sets of muscles pull on these lenses from either side to stretch or relax the lens, allowing us to focus on whatever we're looking at. However, in octopus, these muscles instead move the lens itself forwards and backwards. Another interesting difference between the two eye designs are pupils. In octopus, the pupil is not spherical like ours, it's actually horizontal slit, and also often resembling the shape of a W. By far the biggest difference is in the layout of octopus retina. Humans, we have what's called an inverted retina, which rather counterintuitively means that our light detecting cells actually face away from the direction that light enters the eye. This means that our neurons must leave the back of the eye through a gap in the retina. This is known as our blind spot and reduces the accuracy of our vision. Anyway, let's get back to octopus, which interestingly don't have this problem. Their photoreceptors are the other way around. They have an everted retina, meaning that their photoreceptors are the other way around, meaning that the neurons can run underneath the retina, meaning they don't have a blind spot. This allows them to have much more advanced vision than ours and helps them to find prey and avoid being prey. Another interesting point to make is that octopus don't have colour vision, or at least they don't have it in the way that we humans do. In our eyes, there are two types of photoreceptor: rod cells, which detect black and white, and secondly cone cells, which are used to detect colour. Octopus, however, only have black and white detecting cells, but recent research suggests that octopus might have a kind of colour vision. One theory suggests that the unique shape of the octopus's pupil might actually act as a prism, splitting light into its colour components, potentially allowing the octopus to distinguish between colours. So, octopus eyes are similar in some ways to ours, but it's clear that they view the world much more different than we do. So now we're going to talk about one of the most interesting parts of octopus biology, their skin. Octopus skin is one of the most complex and advanced organs found in the natural world. It is capable of changing colour, pattern, and shape. It's also able to taste and smell at the same time as having its own unique form of sight. The most famous aspect of the skin is its ability to camouflage, blend in with its surrounding environment. The octopus achieves this with a complex three-layer system of different specialized cells. So, the first layer, on the surface, is covered with cells called chromatophores. These cells contain elastic sacs of pigment of a variety of colors. Muscles surrounding these pigment sacs can pull the sacs, stretching them, making the pigment more visible, or relax to make them less visible. These chromatophores are the workhorses when it comes to camouflage. Each chromatophore is controlled individually, allowing for super complex patterns and colors. The next layer beneath the chromatophores is where we find cells called iridophores. Iridophores don't contain a pigment, instead they contain stacks of a reflective protein called reflectin, which can be used to reflect light at specific angles to create certain wavelengths or colors of light. Iridophores mainly produce iridescent blues, greens, and silvers. The layer beneath this contains cells called leucophores. Think of these like a white canvas, better showing the colors of the other cells. These cells achieve this by scattering light uniformly, helping the skin to match the ambient light of the environment. So, that's how an octopus can create patterns and colors. However, they can also change the texture of their skin, whether that be so they can blend in with rocky reefs or appear like a piece of kelp. This fantastic ability is thanks to little organs called papillae. These are scattered across the octopus's skin, and with the help of muscles in the skin, can be raised and lowered and can take on a variety of shapes like spikes, ridges, and bumps. In order to save energy, once a papillae has taken on a certain shape, there is a catch mechanism, allowing it to maintain its shape without actively having to contract muscles. Like I briefly mentioned before, octopus can also technically see with their skin. Octopus skin contains substances called opsins. These are the same substances used by the cells in the retina to detect light. The skin uses these substances to detect changes in the environment and adjust the expansion of its chromatophores accordingly. This is why octopus can camouflage with their surroundings without having to directly see everything around them. The next stop on our anatomy talk is the octopus nervous system. The octopod nervous system is the most astounding feature of the species. We as humans are used to the concept of a centralized nervous system, where the majority of neurons coalesce together to act as a central processing station and the primary seat of consciousness. However, things are much different in an octopus. An octopus essentially has 9 brains, with only a third of all its neurons being found in the head. The other 2/3 of neurons are shared out equally between the 8 arms. Each arm brain is capable of autonomy from the rest of the body. Research has shown that when an arm is removed from the body, it's still able to do basic processes like grabbing food and attempting to eat. This is a stark comparison to humans, which have around 99% of all neurons in the brain. An octopus's central brain is a donut-shaped mass found in the head, wrapped around their esophagus. The brain contains roughly 180 million neurons compared to the 86 billion found in the human brain. The central brain of an octopus often takes a back seat, allowing the arms to work independently. However, it's capable of top-down control when coordination is required, like when escaping a predator. The central brain is also the main center for decision-making and learning. About 2/3 of the octopus's central brain neurons are found in the optic lobes, a pair of structures found either side of the head. These, as you can probably imagine, are responsible for processing visual information, and the fact that these take up 2/3 of all neurons in the brain just shows how important vision is for an octopus. Sitting in between the optic lobes is the vertical lobe system. This is where the other 1/3 of the brain neurons are found, and this brain area is comparable to the human cerebral cortex, being responsible mainly for memory and long-term learning. Now we'll talk about the arm brains. Each of the 8 arms on an octopus contain what is known as a central ganglia, or as I'll be referring to them, arm brains. These are exactly what they sound like, essentially being a large cluster of neurons and nerve cord which process local information from their given arm, allowing each arm to move, taste, and act semi-independently from the rest of the body. Each arm's nerve cord runs along the length of the arm and is segmented, allowing the arm to have precise control over each sucker as well as being able to form an accurate spatial map of the environment through the use of chemoreceptors. Remember, these are the taste buds. So, how is information sent between the arms and the brain? Compared to the 500 million neurons found in an octopus, only around 30,000 are used to connect the arm brains to the central brain. So this presents a tight bottleneck for information, requiring data to be heavily compressed by the arms before it's sent back to the central brain. This means that most sensory information is processed by the arm ganglia locally and probably never even reaches the central brain unless it's vitally important. When coordinated action is required, for movements like crawling, the arms and central brain communicate via what's known as the neural ring, as shown in this image. So that's the octopus's nervous system. Let's talk about their heart and cardiovascular system. An octopus has 9 brains. In keeping with this trend of many organs, they also have 3 hearts. The octopus 3 heart system is composed of 1 major systemic heart alongside 2 branchial hearts. The systemic heart is 3-chambered and receives blood from the gills before pumping it around the rest of the body. The 2 branchial hearts, found at the base of the gills on either side of the head, essentially act as little helper hearts, helping to push deoxygenated blood through the gills at high pressure towards the systemic heart. So, why isn't 1 heart enough? Well, to answer this question, I first need to tell you about octopus blood itself. Octopus, like the real-life aliens that they are, have blue blood. While our blood is red due to its iron-containing oxygen carrier called hemoglobin, octopus blood instead uses a copper-based molecule to transport oxygen, and this results in the blue color. This compound is called hemocyanate, and is actually more efficient at transporting oxygen at colder temperatures, like where octopus live. However, unlike us, octopus don't have blood cells to contain this compound, and therefore, due to the large size of the hemocyanin molecule, octopus blood is incredibly thick. Think of it akin to something like honey, meaning that 3 hearts are required to keep the blood moving around the body. In keeping with their alien nature, octopus also have the strange ability of being able to breathe through their skin. In fact, at rest, up to 40% of an octopus's oxygen can come from skin absorption alone. This is reduced to around 30% when they're swimming. Let's see how their digestive system works. Octopus firstly have very peculiar mouths and methods of eating. As mentioned at the start, the only hard part on an octopus is its beak. This is made from chitin, the same stuff that crab shells are made of. The beak is part of what is known as the octopus's buccal mass, with this being composed of the beak, the radula, this weird tongue-looking thing we'll get back into later, and salivary glands, as well as the muscles required to operate these features. This beak is used to tear apart prey and is capable of cracking open the hard shells of species like lobsters and crabs. The radula is best described as being like a file it's a serrated structure which can be used to drill holes in shelled prey when brute strength isn't enough. After drilling a hole, the octopus will then release digestive enzymes and venom, paralyzing the prey and relaxing its muscles, making the shell easier to open. This is typically reserved for prey like clams, which can be tough for the octopus to open. As I mentioned earlier, an octopus's central brain is donut-shaped and wraps closely around the creature's throat. This presents an interesting problem. If something large was swallowed, this could potentially push against the brain on the way past and cause damage. Therefore, octopus have evolved to chew their food into a liquid-like slurry before swallowing. Once the food has been swallowed, the slurry accumulates in an organ called the crop, where the salivary enzymes continue to digest the food until it travels into the stomach where the slurry is churned into a thinner liquid. From here, the food travels through a few other organs like the cecum and intestines before being excreted out the mantle cavity. Okay, so that's the end of our look into octopus anatomy. Now let's get into the more exciting stuff, like how they move about. So, octopus can move in a variety of different ways. The main way that octopus typically get from A to B is through crawling. It uses much less energy than something like jet propulsion, and also allows for better maintenance of their camouflage since they move at a steady pace. Jet propulsion is usually reserved for making a quick getaway when an octopus feels like it's under threat, or for catching certain types of prey. When under threat, the propulsion is usually combined with the release of ink from their ink sac. This ink is intended to cause confusion to a predator, both by making it harder to see the octopus, but also by containing chemicals that mask the octopus's scent and divert the pursuer's attention. When jet propulsion is used for catching prey, it's usually used in combination with camouflage, with an octopus disguising itself until its prey gets close enough for it to pounce. So, how does jet propulsion work? Firstly, muscles in the mantle wall contract forcefully, drawing water inside the octopus's cavity. Next, a different set of muscles contract, forcefully ejecting the water out of the siphon, propelling the octopus in the opposite direction to wherever the siphon is pointing. The siphon can be pointed in almost any direction, allowing the octopus to move in a variety of different ways. Like I said before, this form of movement is very draining for an octopus and can't be sustained for long. This can also cause what's called a stop beat. This is where the systemic heart misses a beat, causing a rapid oxygen debt. This is obviously not ideal for the octopus, so they usually keep this ability in their back pocket for when they really need it. Many octopus are also able to walk bipedally, this meaning they're able to walk on two legs like us. This has advantages over simple crawling, because it means that only two of the arms must move, allowing the octopus to use the remaining six arms to enhance its camouflage with the surroundings, meaning that they can more easily sneak up on and catch prey. So, now we've seen how octopus move about, let's see how they live. Looking at their life cycle, an octopus begins its life like many creatures on this planet, as an egg. Depending on the species, an octopus female can lay anywhere from 50 to 40,000 eggs in one batch, and they are laid in small holes and under rocks within the female's den. While the eggs develop, the mother will constantly clean and aerate them by blowing water over them to prevent algae growth. Given the number of eggs that are hatched at once, the emerging octopus will face heavy competition, with only roughly 1% of the eggs laid reaching maturity. Eggs usually take between 2 to 10 months, depending on species, to hatch, but it can take longer, especially in species that live in cold deep water. So, after the eggs are fully developed, larvae, or as we'll call them octopods, begin to emerge. I'm going to tell you this story from the perspective of one of these. You wake up from what seems like a long sleep. You can see your hundreds of thousands of brothers and sisters swimming upwards out of the den towards the sunlight. Your mother is either dead or dying, wasted away from months of relentless care. You are on your own. You feel the urge to swim upwards. You're incredibly vulnerable, small transparent version of your adult form, about the size of a rice grain. Once you reach the ocean surface, you drift with the plankton. Plankton is essentially a collection of different microorganisms and small invertebrates like larvae. There are two main kinds of plankton: phytoplankton, which use the sun's energy to make their own food, and zooplankton, which includes small larvae like you. So, Let's get back to the story. While drifting along with the plankton, you feed on other larvae like young crabs and starfish. You do this for a few months, slowly gaining strength and size, until you feel the urge to descend down towards the sea floor, where you'll spend the rest of your life. You have now entered the juvenile stage. You are no longer transparent, appearing almost identical to your adult form, just smaller. You feel an unending hunger and relentlessly hunt for food, your body weight increasing roughly 5% every single day. Your diet at this point is composed of small fish and crustaceans. Through all this hunting, you start to hone your skills, becoming a master at camouflage. At some point after all of this, you will reach maturity, in which point you will start seeking a mate. Mating for an octopus is a dangerous game. Octopus are only able to mate once in their entire life, after which a death switch is triggered, which leads to the octopus's death. Therefore, octopus are incredibly picky when assessing potential partners, engaging in complex courtship behaviors. Mating is an especially dangerous game for males. Many octopus species are known to be cannibalistic, meaning that they often hunt and kill members of their own species. This means that males are very vulnerable, and in many species, males are often smaller compared to the females, meaning that they must approach very carefully to avoid being attacked or eaten. After the two octopuses decide to mate, the male will insert his specialist sex arm into the female's mantle and release his spermatophore packet. While doing this, the male will try to keep the rest of his body as far away as possible from the female to avoid attack. In some species, the sex arm is actually detached from the male's body and left inside to increase the chances of fertilization. After mating takes place, as far as evolution is concerned, the male's purpose has been fulfilled. His genetic material has been passed on, and shortly after, a programmed death switch is activated within the male, forcing the male's optic gland to shift from making growth hormone to produce a lethal cocktail of death signaling and steroid molecules. Not long after this, the male will lose all interest in hunting and eating, and will become either extremely lethargic or erratic as he struggles to cope with the hormonal changes. During this stage, the octopus's body, starved, begins to digest itself for energy, leading to wasting as well as massive cognitive decline, with the octopus losing coordination and the ability to control colours. This is coupled with a loss of healing ability, with small cuts or injuries becoming necrotic. Some octopus actually become so confused that they'll start eating their own arms, either unaware or uncaring that it's their own flesh. It is like this that a male octopus's life sadly comes to an end. The end isn't much greater for females either, although this process does not happen as quickly after mating, for after reproduction the female must find somewhere safe and sheltered to lay her thousands of eggs. Once the female has laid her eggs, she will essentially seal herself away in her den, and similar to males, she will lose all interest in food and hunting, with her only purpose now to ensure as many eggs hatch as possible. She will relentlessly clean and aerate her eggs for months, without rest, selflessly devoting whatever energy she has left to the care of the eggs. This process is driven by similar hormonal changes to those seen in the males, and the female will die within hours or days of the eggs hatching, having given all her energy to them. This programmed death after mating is known as senescence, and thanks to the all or nothing strategy of octopus mating, it is the great tragedy that all octopus must face. Okay, so now we've covered the fundamentals of what makes octopus tick, we're going to take a deeper dive into some of the most common and most interesting species of octopus, taking a real-life look into these species, seeing where they live, how they live, and what makes them special. While most octopus species share the same basic traits, there's huge variation between them, whether that variation is in size, appearance, hunting techniques, or even intelligence. We're going to start off by looking at Octopus vulgaris, so-called common octopus, which, as you can probably guess, is the most well-known and well-studied species. These octopus are usually between 1 and 3 feet in length and weigh around 3 to 10 kilos when fully grown. They typically live for 1 to 2 years and come in a range of different colours, usually orange, brown, or red in colour. They are mostly found on coastlines, in shallow rock pools, and coral reefs, but some have been known to live at depths down to 200 metres. They are skilled nocturnal hunters, favouring night in order to avoid their own predators, which, depending on the area, are usually moray eels, sharks, marine mammals like dolphins and seals, and even some species of seabird. Most of the common octopus's diet is made of crabs, lobsters, clams, and snails. Due to their intermediate place on the food ladder, they've had to develop advanced defense mechanisms in order to survive. Firstly, as we saw earlier, They are masters of camouflage, utilizing their chromatophores and papillae to blend in with the environment, avoiding detection from their predators. When camouflage isn't enough, they use a combination of jet propulsion and ink to get out of there, while leaving the predator blind and confused. Furthermore, due to their invertebrate nature, octopus are second to none when it comes to hiding, being able to squeeze through any gap larger than their eye. And even if all these methods fail, and a predator grabs onto the octopus, they're actually capable of detaching their arms in order to distract the predator and get away. This is usually effective, and octopus are more than capable of regrowing their arms. In addition to these ingenious defense mechanisms, they've also had to evolve similarly complex hunting methods, allowing them to hunt a wide variety of prey. First is the stealth and ambush approach, where the octopus will blend itself in with its surroundings, appearing like part of the landscape, like a piece of coral. From here, the octopus will patiently wait for its prey to get close enough for it to pounce, grabbing onto its prey with its powerful suckers and enveloping it with its webbing, before biting into it with its beak and injecting paralyzing chemicals. Sometimes, octopus vulgaris will take a more passive approach, in a process called speculative hunting, where it will crawl across the sea floor and periodically pounce on rocks or algae, while spreading out its arms and using its webbing like a fishing net. In doing this, it will catch whatever is unlucky enough to be hiding there. Another technique, while not necessarily hunting, more foraging, involves their use of their radula. Remember, this is the drill-like object on their mouth, and they use this to drill into shell prey before releasing their paralyzing toxin. So, that's the common octopus. Now let's move on to our next interesting species, blue-ringed octopus. This is one of the most infamous octopus species. Just one of these is capable of killing 26 adult humans in a few minutes. These octopus are incredibly venomous. While very dangerous, they are small in comparison to the common octopus. The most common species of blue-ringed octopus, of which there are four, being roughly 12 centimeters long and weighing less than 100 grams. The most striking feature they possess are the many bright blue rings they have on their skin, warning any would-be predators of their toxicity. This species is found in shallow tropical waters, like those surrounding Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and Australia. They frequent the coral reefs and rocky areas, including tide pools. Although over the last few years, deaths from these octopus have become almost unheard of due to a combination of modern medical interventions, as well as the octopus being naturally shy and skittish, the threat is still real, with many people being bitten by them every year. These octopus primarily feed on crustaceans, like crabs and shrimp, and sometimes small fish and even cannibalism, using their specialized toxins to incapacitate their prey. So, how are they so toxic? While most octopus species have some form of venom used to immobilize their prey, the blue-ringed octopus is special and contains a toxin called TTX, short for tetrodotoxin. TTX is a potent neurotoxin, blocking the transmission of nerve impulses, leading to quick paralysis followed by death in high enough concentrations. This toxin is dispersed throughout the octopus's entire body, but is most concentrated in the salivary glands and the skin. Surprisingly, the blue-ringed octopus doesn't actually produce the TTX toxin itself. Over years of evolution, these octopus have developed a symbiotic relationship with a handful of bacteria species which produce the TTX for them. In exchange, the octopus offers the bacteria a safe place to live and nutrients to feed off. So, if this TTX toxin is so toxic, why doesn't it kill the octopus itself? Well, blue-ringed octopus have a genetic mutation that changes the shape of the receptors on their neurons, preventing the TTX molecule from binding to them. However, evolution works both ways, and unfortunately for the blue-ringed octopus, one of its major predators, the moray eel, has also developed TTX resistance. Blue-ringed octopus is not completely invulnerable. Many fish species will also still attempt to eat the blue-ringed octopus, meaning that the octopus might still get killed, even if it also results in the death of the predator. We're now going to be looking at what is known as the blanket octopus. This is known for a very peculiar reason: the extreme difference between the males and females. A female blanket octopus is over 100 times larger than an adult male of the same species. This difference between males and females is known in biology as sexual dimorphism. So, let's first talk about the females. They're most easily recognized for their massive trailing webbing, which drifts behind the octopus and can make up to two-thirds of the total length, usually about 1 meter. This is where the blanket name comes from. They typically weigh around 10 kilos and have a silvery and dark purple coloration. The males, to an untrained eye, or to be fair, even a trained eye, look like a completely different species. They're no bigger than a grape and only weigh around 30 grams, almost unbelievable compared to the females, which weigh 10 kilos. The males also lack the blanket webbing. This is one of the most extreme cases of sexual dimorphism seen in nature. It took scientists a long time to realize that these were actually the same species. The female's diet is mostly composed of small fish, marine snails, crustaceans, and jellyfish. The males, being so much smaller, essentially just eat whatever they can, mostly zooplankton and small crustaceans. The female's blankets serve multiple purposes, being used mainly for defense by making the octopus appear much larger, scaring away many predators. Webbing is also used to store and protect eggs. However, the males of this species aren't insignificant. I would say they're even more interesting. Due to their small size, males and juveniles of this species are highly vulnerable to predators. However, they have a trick under their sleeve, or more specifically, in their hands. Blanket octopus have evolved resistance to the Portuguese man-of-war, a jellyfish-looking organism that packs a deadly venom and paralyzes or kills most small to mid-sized species that touch it. These males and juveniles will tear off the man-of-war's tentacles and use them like a whip, both for defense and hunting. This is an amazing case of tool use, which is something we'll be diving deeper into later on in the video when we come to assess how intelligent octopus are. Moving on from this, we're now going to investigate another species, the giant Pacific octopus. Giant Pacific octopus. What makes this species particularly cool? They are massive, with adults usually being around 16 feet or 5 meters in width and weighing roughly 45 to 50 kilos. For context, the common octopus was only around 5 kilo on average, so this is 10 times that. However, there have also been cases of much larger giant Pacific octopus being found, with the largest ever recorded being 30 feet or 9 meters wide, and 600 pounds. For reference, this is around the average height of a two-story house. These octopus have the same structural build and similar appearance to the common octopus, only being much larger. Due to this huge size, giant Pacific octopus occupy a different spot on the food chain, unlike most octopus species. Instead of being somewhere in the middle, they're more closer to being apex predators, with their only real threat being large marine mammals like seals and large sharks. Therefore, giant Pacific octopus are master hunters, being able to hunt most creatures in their habitat. There is even evidence of giant Pacific octopuses ambushing and killing small sharks and even seagulls, dragging them down into the water. In addition to this size and strength, these creatures are also studied for their advanced problem-solving abilities. For instance, giant Pacific octopuses are often seen performing a strange but genius hunting tactic. You know how sometimes someone will tap you on your shoulder to make you look the other way and confuse you? Giant Pacific octopuses essentially do this to their prey. Using one arm, they'll tap the far side of their intended prey, like a lobster, causing it to try and run away from that arm, right into the clutches of the other arms. While this technique is not observed in all members of this species, it's still very interesting. Okay, so lastly we have an honourable mention, the mimic octopus, which is famous for, well, mimicking. This intriguing but small species usually top out at around 2 feet in length and typically weigh less than a kilo. However, these octopus are capable of especially astounding camouflage. Not just camouflage, they're capable of impersonating other species. For example, if a mimic octopus feels threatened, it can disguise itself as a venomous snake, even copying the typical movement pattern of the said snake, confusing would-be attackers and preventing the octopus from being eaten. These octopus can impersonate a huge variety of different species, and research shows that mimic octopus will choose different species specifically depending on the situation, such as choosing a species that is of greatest threat to their particular predator. So now we've seen what makes an octopus, and looked at some of the most fascinating species. It's time for the big question. Just how intelligent are these creatures? Are they sentient? Could they one day even develop to the point where we are? To answer this question, we have to take a structured approach. When scientists are tasked with assessing how intelligent a life form is, they often use a standard list of metrics to try and evaluate what cognitive skills the creature has and is capable of. The list of metrics we'll be using is as follows: brain size, tool use, mirror self-recognition, theory of mind, problem-solving ability, episodic memory, quantity discrimination, delayed gratification, and play. So, let's begin. When first tasked with assessing an organism's intelligence, the first thing that likely comes to mind is how big is their brain. Typically, when using brain size as a metric, scientists use the brain-to-body ratio rather than raw brain size. This is because this gives a much better idea of how much energy an organism devotes to brain power. In humans, our brain-to-body ratio is roughly between 1 to 40 and 1 to 50, whereas in an octopus it ranges from 1 to 40 to 1 to 100, depending on the particular species. So in some species, the brain-to-body ratio is somewhat comparable with us humans, with octopus devoting a huge amount of resources to their nervous system. However, while the ratio is useful, raw processing power is still important. Including the arm brains, octopus have only around 500 million neurons, whereas we have about 170 times more neurons than this, around 86 billion. I think it's important to mention here as well that due to the huge evolutionary gap between us and octopus, comparing raw metrics like brain sizes and ratios can only be used with a huge grain of salt when discussing how intelligent octopus are. This is because our nervous systems have evolved very differently and independently, and while one may be smaller, it might also be more efficient. So while knowing the ratios and sizes is useful, it can't be a major player in our final analysis of how intelligent octopus are. So let's now take a look at some of the other metrics of intelligence, now looking at tool use. Tool use is one of the most important and famous metrics used to study intelligence, since it shows the ability of an animal to manipulate objects and the environment around them in order to achieve a certain goal. We've just seen one of the more creative forms of tool use, the blanket octopus and man-of-war tentacles. However, this is just one of the ways that tools are used by octopus. Meet the veined octopus, or as it's more commonly known, the coconut octopus. These octopus are famous for a very strange tactic. They're often seen carrying two broken halves of a coconut shell along with them wherever they go. When they're threatened by something, it soon becomes obvious why they go through the trouble of lugging them around. They will assemble the two halves together and hide inside the shell. Most octopus species also use rocks, shells, and other materials to build and reinforce their dens, helping to protect them from would-be predators. So clearly octopus passed the tool use metric with flying colours. Another common metric used to determine intelligence is the ability to recognize oneself in a mirror. This means knowing that they are looking at their own reflection rather than another individual. In octopus, most data and research suggests that octopus actually lack this ability, with octopus usually treating their reflection with either aggression or curiosity, but they don't seem to recognize that it's them. However, most experts believe that this can mainly be put down to the fact that unlike us and most other animals that share this ability, they're not social creatures. Additionally, many people believe that the mirror self-recognition ability should not be used as a be-all end-all for determining self-awareness. For example, dogs fail the mirror recognition test, but they're capable of other forms of recognition, like recognizing their own scent. Therefore, when looking at octopuses, the closest thing to real-life aliens, it's not unsurprising that they fail this test. Moving on from that, the next thing we'll be looking at is whether or not the octopus have what's called theory of mind. To put it simply, this is essentially the ability to recognize that other creatures have their own emotions and thought processes. For example, you see someone drop one of their earbuds and they start looking around the room. Theory of mind means that you'll understand that they're searching for their earbud. You essentially read their mind. The jury is currently unsettled on the matter of whether or not octopus have this ability, so I'll give both sides of the argument and let you decide for yourself. Firstly, it's the case against. Similarly to when we looked at self-recognition, theory of mind is a social ability, likely having evolved to manage complex social relationships in a group. Therefore, it wouldn't make much sense for an octopus to evolve the ability to recognize another being's mental state, due to octopus being antisocial creatures. Testing theory of mind is also understandably difficult. Most of the other animals with theory of mind are mammals, and with the common ancestors between us and octopus being 600 million years ago, it's very unlikely that we would be able to test it in a similar way. However, there are some interesting examples that suggest that octopus might have theory of mind after all. Firstly, there is a famous story of an octopus that kept leaving its tank at night when nobody was around, opening the lid of another tank, stealing a fish, before putting the lid back in place, returning to its tank, eating the fish, and hiding the evidence. This story potentially points to theory of mind. This is primarily because this only happened when no one was around. The lid was put back in place, and the octopus was known to hide the bones. This stealthy behavior could be interpreted as the octopus being able to understand that its human keepers would be unhappy that the fish had been eaten, and that the keepers would know that it was the octopus that had eaten them. However, this hiding of evidence could also just be an adaptive behavior, rather than sentient problem solving. This particular case occurred at Brighton Aquarium in the late 19th century, but there have been many similar instances since. Leaving the idea of theory of mind to the side for the time being, we move on to our next metric for intelligence, problem solving. After watching this video so far, it should come as no surprise to you that octopus excel when it comes to problem solving. This makes sense. With octopus being in the middle of the food chain, they have to constantly fend off a wide range of predators, while at the same time having to hunt a wide variety of prey, ranging from fast fish to armored crustaceans, as well as hunting hard-shelled species such as clams. This means that octopus are constantly having to make logical, reasoned decisions in novel situations. This ability has also been tested in the lab, with the most famous example being when octopus were tested on their ability to unscrew jars. In this experiment, common octopus were presented with a see-through glass jar with a live crab inside. The jar was then placed into their tank, and the octopus would immediately approach the jar, seeing the prey inside. After a short time, many of the octopus, without prior training, were able to figure out how the jar worked, using their suckers to twist the lid open. Once an octopus had done this once, subsequent attempts would only take a few seconds. In addition to this, studies also found that an octopus would figure out the task much more quickly if they first saw another octopus open a jar, suggesting social learning, which is unusual given that in the wild octopus rarely have an opportunity to learn from another, suggesting the potential that octopus might have the capacity for culture if they were able to live longer. So, octopus clearly aced the metric of problem solving. The next thing we'll be looking at is episodic memory. Episodic memory is basically the ability to remember a specific past event or experience by recalling the what, when, and where of an event. For instance, in a chimp, episodic memory might look something like this. I saw a dangerous snake next to that tree in the bushes yesterday. Therefore, I will avoid this area. Or, I found fresh fruit on that tree yesterday, so I will go there to look for food tomorrow. Current research suggests that the octopus most likely possess this ability to retain specific, detailed memories. For instance, octopus are able to recognize human faces and attribute specific emotions to them. In one experiment in 2010, involving giant Pacific octopuses, an octopus had two keepers. One of the keepers was the friendly keeper and would regularly feed the octopus. The other keeper played the role of a nasty keeper and would prod the octopus with a bristly stick. After a few days of this, the octopus displayed remarkably different responses to the two keepers, with the octopus acting neutral or positive towards the friendly keeper and acting defensively towards the mean keeper, even spraying this mean keeper with water when they walked past. This behavior was repeated even when the two keepers wore identical clothing, showing that it was the face that the octopus was recognizing. This suggests that octopus have episodic memory, since they seem to be able to recognize the keepers' faces, and also remember what its past experiences with that individual keeper were. This, combined with the fact that octopus's closely related cephalopod cousins, the cuttlefish, have been confirmed to have episodic memory, makes it very likely that octopus also share this ability. So, the octopus has passed another one of the metrics. Now for the next test. Quantity discrimination. Compared to the other metrics, this one's quite simple. Can an octopus mentally count objects and discern whether there are more of one thing here or more there? An example to demonstrate would be to ask, would an octopus choose the tank with 3 shrimp or the tank with 6? This ability to mentally count has been determined to be a somewhat effective metric for intelligence, since it requires the organism to have logical, rational thinking. On this metric, however, the octopus failed. Studies seem to suggest that they're unable to work numerically, e.g., 1 shrimp versus 2 shrimp. However, being these real-life aliens that they are, evolution has come up with a creative alternative. We learned earlier that octopus skin, especially the skin on the arms, is covered with tiny chemoreceptors. Remember, these are basically just taste buds, and octopuses can essentially detect the differences in the number of taste buds being activated on different parts of the body, meaning that the octopus would, in basic terms, be able to taste that there are more of a prey species on one side compared to the other, while not being able to directly count them mentally. So, while they failed this test in a traditional sense, I would say they still semi-pass this metric, since they have their own way of doing things. We now come to one of the most important indicators of an animal's intelligence, this being delayed gratification. This is the self-control to be able to delay a reward or pleasure in order to achieve a certain goal. A good example of this in humans would be a person choosing to eat healthy food instead of fast food in order to look after their long-term health. You're essentially going against your own biological drives to eat high-calorie food in order to serve your own goals for the future. So, going back to Octopus, it's clear that they have this ability. We have already seen a perfect example of it with the coconut octopus. It chooses to carry around its heavy coconut shells everywhere it goes, requiring massive energy expenditure and slowing them down. They sacrifice speed and energy in exchange for increased safety. Delayed gratification is a great indicator of intelligence. It suggests that the individual is able to reject momentary success in exchange for the future, suggesting that the organism is capable of planning and not just living in the present, a hallmark of high intelligence. Okay, now we move on to our last metric, play. While not usually a traditional metric for determining intelligence, I think that the existence of play-like behavior in octopus is also a signal for high intelligence. Now, when I say play, I'm talking about curiosity and entertainment-driven activities, which don't really have much impact on survival or reproduction benefit. These activities indicate high creativity, another strong indicator for intelligence. Evidence of play-like behavior has been reported by many studies, such as one in 2006, which, to summarize, gave 14 wild-caught common octopuses Lego blocks. These acted as novel objects, since obviously octopus would never have encountered these in the wild, and the study investigated what the octopus did with them. Initially, most of the octopus investigated the blocks, trying to assess if they were edible or not. However, interestingly, after a few days, 9 out of 14 of the octopuses had exhibited play-like behaviors, such as passing the blocks between their arms. Similarly, octopus at Lethbridge University were seen blowing bottles into their tank's water pumps and catching them when they pop back out. This further points towards octopus being highly intelligent, with them being highly curious and creative, coming up with unique ways of entertaining themselves, essentially for the sake of it, with these behaviours having no effect on their survival or bodily needs. So, if we include play, octopus pass, arguably, 6 out of 10 of our metrics, scoring highly for problem solving, tool use, memory, self-control, playfulness, and brain-to-body ratio, also arguably showing signs of theory of mind. All this together with other things we have seen, such as skilled camouflage and creative hunting tactics, points towards octopus being incredibly intelligent. While it's impossible to put a value on how intelligent something is, I think it's safe to say that octopus are likely the second most intelligent group of species after us mammals, offering us a real window into what alien intelligence might look like on another planet. To finish off this journey into the life and biology of the octopus, we're going to take a peek into the future to see what might be in store for these eight-armed aliens. It's believed by many evolutionary biologists that octopuses are the most likely species to become advanced in a post-human world. I'd like to say, just to be clear, that the ideas I'm about to speak about are obviously speculative and would likely take millions and millions of years. So, let's get into it. We've already seen the main roadblocks currently stopping octopus from becoming advanced. Firstly, they have a very short lifespan of only 1 to 2 years. This, as we've learned, is due to the senescence death switch, which gets activated after mating. This prevents interaction between the old and new generations, preventing the kind of sharing of knowledge and information that can lead to accumulated knowledge and eventually culture. I highlighted earlier how octopus were able to learn how to open the jars by watching another octopus do it first, showing that this kind of information transfer is possible. Therefore, in order to become advanced, octopus would first have to evolve to bypass this death switch, allowing them to live longer. However, there's still another huge hurdle, that being the antisocial life of an octopus. In the wild, octopus have very minimal interactions with other octopus, and when they do interact, it's either aggression or mating. So, for octopus to have their own cultures and eventually civilization, they would need to become more communal and social, and this isn't as far-fetched as it seems. It would simply require natural conditions to shift in a way that made group living more beneficial than living alone. In fact, there is actually evidence of this happening. In 2012, off the coast of Australia, scientists discovered a congregation of around 15 octopus living together in close dens. This place was dubbed Octopolis. Later on, other similar sites were also found, with another being called Octlantis. While 15 might not sound like a lot, this was unprecedented in octopus. It's also important to point out that when I say living together, I don't mean that they were friendly, just that they tolerated each other, which in itself is rare for octopus. This, however, does show that it's not entirely implausible that in future, octopus might shift towards a more social nature, especially if they evolve to live longer. If both of these obstacles are overcome, short life and antisocial nature, it could be possible to believe that octopus could have their own civilization. While this is completely speculative, I still find that it's incredibly fascinating to imagine a post-human world where octopus are the dominant species. However, octopus aren't going to be rivaling us anytime soon. They're still hard programmed to self-destroy after reproduction, and are locked into an endless cycle of learning and forgetting. Nonetheless, while they might not live for long, how should this knowledge of octopus intelligence affect the way we interact with them? These creatures seem highly sentient, being capable of creativity, curiosity, and other complex emotions. Octopus are still killed daily for their meat, and there are currently plans to start farming octopus on an industrial scale. This poses a significant ethical dilemma, which leads to broader, more philosophical questions, such as should we treat animals differently because of high intelligence? And should we continue hunting and eating octopus? Hopefully you found this video interesting, and you now have a newfound respect for these fascinating creatures, these real-life aliens. I'm going to be making more videos like this in the future on other interesting species, so it'd be good for you to let me know what stuff you'd like to see in the future. Cheers for watching.